Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Tuesday, December the 19th, 2017 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And another edition of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And Wendy, I hope you've been having a great day.
I have been having my dose of happy, absolutely.
And you're going to get another one now, another hour's worth.
You bet.
That's the best part about doing this. We get the dose of happy, too. It's not just the listeners. We get it. So, anyway, wins for the day. Biggest win that we've had so far today actually happened late last night. We broke the 10,000 play mark, and that is measured since November 2016. I never really did have a good way of measuring plays before that, so I kind of lost data for the first 4 years. But since November 2016, we have 10,000 plays, and we blew right past it. It wasn't even close.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, if I remember correctly, a play is someone who's downloaded the show or listened to the show or started listening to the show,
right.
But somebody hit play in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. And we also have a very high rate of people playing the whole show or large portions of it. Because when I compare the number of plays to, say, the amount of bandwidth used, it's usually around 2/3 to 3/4 of a show length that gets used. So people are definitely listening, and that's great. That makes us happy.
Well, and ratings on like broadcast television or cable or radio, tells the station owners, who's listening and who cares. Because obviously they want to sell advertising, and they can't sell advertising if nobody's listening or watching or paying attention.
Right.
And so for us, this is so great because we don't even have to sell this right now to advertisers, but we're getting a great following simply because people really like the content. Exactly.
And that's the best reason of all to have somebody listen. And quite honestly, I have pretty high goals in mind for this show. I mean, I'll dare to tell you what my goal is. I want us to get this year, or by this year I mean 2018, I want us to hit the 1 million play mark, which is an astronomical goal compared to 10,000. But hey, I think we can get there. And
I think so too.
As you mentioned, that's the kind of thing radio stations want to have in order to put a program on. So can you imagine we get to the 1 million play mark and now we start marketing ourselves to the various radio networks and we get a gig doing like a national broadcast to a large audience? Whoa.
I'm on board.
That'll be fun. That'll be a blast. We'll have so much fun doing that. So yeah, that's the goal that I've set for 2018. And it's a pretty aggressive goal, but I think we can make it. You and I have talked a lot about the marketing aspect, trying to get more and more listeners involved, and the other co-hosts have gotten really enthusiastic too. So I think once we put a plan together and start implementing it, the universe will take care of the rest for us.
Absolutely. And, here's the double-edged positive sword, which is this show's about law of attraction. And, we want to implement the laws of attraction the way we know they can be utilized in a deliberate fashion.
Oh, yeah.
So hitting the $1 million point, or not million, okay, I love that. What a great faux pas. The
Wonderful.
$1 million point, okay. Let's just somehow find a way to associate 1 million listeners with $1 million for all of us. I think that's very doable. It's very doable. And by the way, these little faux pas, I believe there's no such thing as accidents. So I think there's $1 million waiting for us.
Oh, okay.
Like in our vortexes, and so it just slipped out. Woohoo!
Hey, I won't complain about that. That'll be a nice addition. I'll take that. Sure, yeah.
I mean, now I'm not at $1 million, but I did hit a milestone dollar amount for how much I've earned this year.
Really?
And, yeah, it's a dollar amount that I put into place. I guess I set the goal over 10 years ago.
Wow.
And at that time, I didn't, I hoped it would be achievable.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like one paycheck short of rounding out this year.
Wow.
And just adding my normal base salary to what I've already made will definitely top the number that I've been looking for.
Fantastic.
And I asked myself, okay, so how does it feel? And here's the interesting part. It feels normal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 10 years ago when I set this goal, I couldn't imagine what it would be like to make this much money. I just thought, oh my God, you could buy the Taj Mahal. I mean, I think I had some grandiose thoughts, but it was like, wow. But I thought about it and I thought how it has occurred has been incremental.
Yeah.
Over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's been little teeny jumps, a couple thousand here, a couple thousand there each year, more and more, until all of a sudden I've reached this number that I didn't think would be ever possible for me, or I hoped it would. It's what I wanted. And now that it's here, I'll tell you the one big thing that has changed. Now I know that setting a dream that feels really big and beyond my reach is really possible.
Oh, okay.
Because I did it. And so that to me totally fits with wanting to have 1 million listeners by the end of 2018. Because yes, today in 2017 it feels really astronomically huge because we're only at 10,000. But I believe it is very, very doable because when you set your sights on it and you want it with everything in your being, it happens.
And to be perfectly honest, I don't think of it as only 10,000. I think of it as, wow, 10,000. And you know why?
I'm with you.
Because last November and December, for the grand total number of plays I had for the months of November and December was under 100. So at that point in time, by the logic you just described, 10,000 would have seemed impossible. And yet here we are. Well, shoot, there's not a whole lot of difference from a source energy point of view between 10,000 and 1 million. They're really not all that different. Why not?
And Abraham, and I love how Abraham says this, that in creation terms, there is no difference to them in creating a castle or a button.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A castle. We're talking a huge castle or a button. And in terms of source energy, it takes the same amount of effort. It's like, it's no big deal. Do you want a button or do you want a castle? You pick.
And I have to admit, I've never asked for a castle because I wasn't sure where to put it. But that's still... it's
honestly, I've never asked for a button either. But it does let me know things are very possible. And I'll tell you, the dollar amount that I was wanting to earn wasn't anything except I remember my boss at my last company made this much money.
Oh, I see.
And I remember thinking, wow, because that was like beyond 2/3 more than what I was making. And I thought that just seemed like the biggest number. And frankly, not even possible for who I was and what my skill sets were. I didn't even think the market would ever pay that. And here it is some 10 years later, and I'm like, really? And in a way, it feels a little anticlimactic because when I was like 10 years ago at that salary, where I am now seemed like a huge leap. And it was a huge leap 10 years ago. But it was less of a leap each year since. And I knew last year I was getting close to that total. But it's not like something I think about every day. But since we were coming close to the end of the year, I was starting to pre-plan, putting my taxes together.
Sure.
And so I started thinking, I wonder what my income is. And I looked and went, oh, my gosh, I'm about to do it. Oh, my gosh, this is amazing.
You also made an interesting comment. You asked yourself how it felt, and your conclusion was that it felt normal. And that tied right in with what Cindy Chavez and I talked about this morning, because one of the things we mentioned in our conversation was that money is difficult because it's abstract. It's hard to have emotional attachments to money. In fact, we really can't. The most we can do is have emotional attachments or emotional interests, shall we say, in what you can do with money. And that's where, that's why we focus on that kind of thing. That's why you coaches focus on, so what do you want to buy? And, how does that feel and so forth. But you can't, there is no feeling about money. It's like we posed this morning. What does $50,000 feel like? I don't know. What does $50 million feel like? I don't know. It's just money. It's not, it's if you have the physical paper in your mind, in your hand rather, what does that feel like? Oh, it feels like a pile of paper.
But I do know, because I have been aware of this, that the phrases and the things I would talk about in reference to money have changed over the years. So as I've had incremental advances in how much money I make, I've had incremental shifts in how I think about money and how I think about the things I buy or don't buy. And like, for instance, 10 years ago, I've always been frugal, or I should say better yet, I always like a great sale. That's exciting to me. And no matter how much money I make, I still love something on a sale. It feels better in the purchasing of it.
You and Louise. Louise just, if she can get any kind of discount at all, it could be on a $5 item. It just makes her day. It's great.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's something really dumb. It was about a year ago. There's this daily calendar, calendar planner that I've been using for years. And so I get the same one every year, and, around September, October, I buy the next year one. And I had been receiving this coupon in the mail for $3 off of shipping, which I couldn't Google online any coupon that would help me out with that. So I was like, yay, I'll get $3 off. Well, when I actually went to make the purchase of this calendar, I had totally forgotten about my $3 off coupon. And so I just purchased it at full price, and I think I paid like $7 for the shipping, which to me was astronomical for this small little calendar. And, I pushed send and, or place order, and it was done. And then like the next day, I find this $3 off shipping coupon. It ate my lunch. I was so upset that I missed out on this $3. And do you know? Well, this is how frugal I can be. It bothered me for over a year.
Ooh.
Every time I think about that calendar, I think about how I got cheated out of that $3. So when I tell you that, like, these little thoughts have been there, I mean, I have pervasive thoughts that have stuck with me. But one of the things that I know that has shifted for me has been, like, now if something like happens, if I forget about a coupon, I had it in my purse and I didn't think to use it. Now the thought that comes to me is, no big deal. It's just money, and I can have more of it anytime I want. There's always more money on its way. Now,
much better.
I didn't just come into that thought process overnight, but as I started to see that money was loosening up in my life, I didn't have to hold so tightly to the fear of squandering it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't have a fear of that. And now it's like I told you a couple of days ago, I was looking for a new refrigerator.
Right.
And so, I go to the stores and I say, do you have a price range? And I said, well, I always want a good deal, but I said I'm pretty open. And I realized I'm just looking for one that has the features that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm interested in, there's probably a price gap between the cheapest one I found on sale was $1,300, and I've seen some as high that I liked for $2,800.
Oh, okay.
And to me, that's a pretty huge price gap.
It is.
And in the past, I wouldn't have even looked at anything. It was over $1,500, and even then that would have been a hardship.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so fun to go, well, what do I want? What do I want?
It's a much better frame of mind.
I will say, along the way of building my income, I have fantasized what it would be like to be able to go and buy something and not be concerned about the price.
That's a good fantasy. That's a really good fantasy. That's a good one for any of us to adopt. In fact, I've tried that at times, and it makes me wonder why I haven't done it lately. But that's a great fantasy.
And it's like, what would it be like that when I need to when I want to buy a car, I could buy any car I want, and price is not an object. And I got to tell you, everything in me says, I want the best car I can get and still have no car payment, because I haven't had a car payment in at least 15 years. And I have to say, I love having zero car payment.
Sure.
And so part of my building the words and the thoughts I focus on is, so at such point I need a new car, and I don't right now, but at such point I do, I wonder what I'll get where I can buy it for cash, or someone will give it to me, or somehow I'll have just enough money for it, because no car payments. I'm done with car payments. Me and car payments just don't go together. And yet, here's the cool part. When I don't know if you're like me, but I'll be driving my car and all of a sudden it'll start making some noise, and my first thought is, oh my God, the car is dead. I'm going to have to buy a new one. And I immediately go to, am I in a position financially to afford a new car? Now, fortunately, it's always been I take it to the mechanic and they go, oh, it's a $3 part, or I have to do some extensive work, but it's still affordable. It's not time to get a new car. But I've thought about it. When that point comes, I want to be in a position that I can still acquire a new vehicle and maintain not having a car payment.
But
and
hey,
I absolutely know that's what will happen whenever it's time to get a new car, because it's already happened for me twice now.
and hey, if that's what you really want, that's what's going to happen. As long as you're staying true to that thought, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't happen.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I've had my last 2 cars have been without car payments. One, somebody gave me a new car because she wanted to upgrade. It was my mother-in-law. She wanted to upgrade hers, and she said, would you like my car because it's still beautiful and wonderful? I'm like, yeah. It was an improvement over my last one. So it's like, yeah, I'll take that.
Well, a free car is an improvement over almost anything. I mean.
And then the car she had given me, I felt really bad because I got rear-ended, and that car ended up being totaled.
Ooh.
And then the car I have now is my Jaguar, where I was able to take the money I got from insurance and put in one paycheck of money, and boom, I paid cash for it because I bought it at a luxury dealer wholesaler, which I didn't know at the time even existed, but I found it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I have no car payment, and I've had this car now for a long time. So
Wendy's driving the Jag.
Yes, Wendy's driving a Jag. But I told you the story of how I got it for less than $10,000, and
Wow.
it was only 6 years old, and it had low miles.
Whoa.
Yeah, but I said, I want a car that not only can I buy outright, but that somebody kept in the garage, and that it looks brand new, and nobody would even know except for knowing the model, of the year. And sure enough, I found a car that, because there were 2 seat settings on it, I could tell one was a large person, and I'm assuming it was the husband because the seat was way back, so he was probably really tall also.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one must have been his wife because the seat was pushed all the way up to the dashboard, and it was raised as high as possible.
Yep.
And so it's like, I'm assuming I just made this up in my head. It was probably an older couple, and as soon as the car warranty was out, they sold it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was right after the warranty was up. It was 63,000 miles.
Okay.
But it looked brand new. I mean, it looked like it came off the showroom. It was so well kept.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it was at a dealership for $9,950.
That's phenomenal. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
That's law of attraction.
That seemed impossible. And I remember others saying, you're not going to get what you're asking for because what you want is really unreasonable.
Apparently not.
And I just said, watch me.
Yeah.
Watch me. Watch the universe point me in the direction of where what I'm looking for is.
Well, it dovetails nicely with the idea you had for a topic today, because their words were that it wasn't going to happen, and your words were, watch me.
Watch me. And so the topic I had thought about for today is, do you have it in front of you? Because I want to get the wording of it correctly.
Actually, I don't have it immediately in front of me, but
okay, it had to do with.
I believe it was the gist of it was, why does my wording matter?
Yeah, do my words really matter?
Right.
Do the words really matter? And I will say yes and no. And I kind of made that the topic just because I think it's fun to play with.
Mm-hmm.
If you say words but have a lightheartedness about them, then the feeling of the lightheartedness is what really counts.
Yes.
Like you've probably heard people say things where they could go, really, in a really sarcastic method or in a sarcastic way, and you know that there's not a happy communication with that. Or really? Which is like this wonderful lilt of curiosity or amazement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really the feeling behind the words that makes the difference to the law of attraction.
Yes.
But what conceived this concept or this topic for me today was I've noticed lately I've been really honing in and paying attention to what coworkers say, what people on TV say. Just everywhere I go, I'm really listening to what words they say. And it's interesting how sometimes within just a paragraph of conversation, you can tell what direction they're leaning on certain given topics by the words they use, and oftentimes the inflection they use while using them.
Yeah, absolutely true. And by the way, before we get any deeper into the topic, I want to remind everybody who's listening, if you're liking what you're hearing right now, this is a good time to send out a message via your favorite social media channel. Hey, I'm listening to LOA today. They got a really interesting topic they're talking about. What does it mean when we're using particular words? Just share it, because we want to share the message about this program with as many people as we can. And we have a lot of sharing to do when you think about our goal. Our goal is to get to 1 million plays over the course of 2018. So got to start right now. And it helps.
Absolutely.
And it helps our listeners too, because this is your daily dose of happy. You get it twice a day. It's a wonderful way to get that pick-me-up, especially toward the end of the day where you're kind of dragging a little bit. Well, you can tune in and get that last bit of pick-me-up to just get you through the rest of the day and make you feel good and productive and all the things that you want to be for the day. So please just share it with some friends. And if you haven't subscribed, by the way, do subscribe. But we'll talk about that at the end of the show. Getting back to it. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt what you were saying, but I just had to get that in.
I'm glad you did. I'm absolutely glad you did. But, if you listen to people's conversations, you really do know where they're leaning, if they're moving in the direction of what they desire or moving away from the direction from what they desire.
Oh, yeah.
And, I was out with a couple girlfriends over the weekend, and one of the things I noticed is, and we're all coaches in one way or another, or in the metaphysical arts, and I noticed that there was a lot of conversation around kind of our entrainment, as in, like, well, this is what we've been taught, and our parents didn't know that, and so they taught us what they knew, and our teachers didn't know, and society says this, and it was all geared toward the negative messaging that is in our environment and how that's what we grew up with, and basically that's kind of what we're all working on overcoming. And I kind of threw into the conversation, because this is what kind of came to me. I said, when are we going to stop talking about our entrainment? When are we going to stop talking about our poor, pitiful pasts? And I wasn't talking about, I'm talking about the four of us.
Right.
And we're all coaches. It's like, when are we just going to drop those words from our conversations? Because here's what I know. If I talk about, well, I didn't grow up knowing those things then, in the moment I'm saying it, I'm actually reactivating the feelings that I have about not being trained in a way that set me up for success in the way that I thought I should have been.
So true. Absolutely.
And so it's not always the words exactly, but it's the conversations, it's the stories, it's the phrases, it's the tales that we tell. And I like to use the word habitual, as in, if we're using habitual languaging or habitual phrases and stories that are not serving us, we keep dragging ourselves back into what we don't want.
It happens every day, too. That's the thing that bothers me, because I see it in my own life. I see it between my wife and I see it out in society. And I see it among people who understand how the law of attraction works, people who I know. I see myself do it, even though I know how the law of attraction works. And it I don't know, I think it just drives me nuts, because I kind of wish, on the one hand, that in every one of those situations where I was doing it, there was the other piece of me that was saying, hey, look what you're doing here, Walt.
Or like a little buzzer would go off in your ear and let you know, hey, you're saying that thing you don't want to be saying.
And thank you for playing our game.
Wouldn't that be nice if Alex Trebek would come on and play,
right.
hit a buzzer or do the Jeopardy music or something.
Let's play Double Story.
Really. And what I recognize, especially because I was at a table of 4 women who are all working towards improving our own lives as well as those as our clients' lives, if we're still doing it, it tells me that's how pervasive talking about what is in the negative is just out there.
It's crazy.
And we're not even catching ourselves. And I know in particular, I've had this conversation with a good friend of mine a couple of times. And when we talk about it, her response is, oh, I know, it's terrible that we're doing that. We really must stop. And, what can I do to remind myself not to go down that road anymore? And we even one time made a pact, okay, while we're talking at dinner, let's just catch each other every time we see ourselves or hear the other one going down that trail of the negative past, or we're using words that really don't serve us. Let's bring it to each other's attention. So we made that as an agreement.
Good one.
And so we did it for maybe the first 15 minutes. And then after a while, I still was catching her, but I thought, I just said, this is the exact same thing. I just buzzed her on 3 times already. And I'm not, trust me, I'm not having any judgment on her because I'm sure it was just as pervasive for me. But it's like, okay, she's not getting it. And it's like, I wonder where I'm not getting it. And when I say we're not getting it, it's because we're that unaware of the very thing that we're doing. But on a broader spectrum, if we talk about it, we definitely are both in agreement. We don't want to be doing this, but yet we continue to do it.
It certainly would be good to do it regularly with somebody. I mean, Louise and I will do it particularly when we're noticing the other person's really in a rough place and we're trying to help them. So our way of saying it is, I hear Louise say something with a negative spin to it, and I'll say to her, turn it around. And she knows that means, oh, right, I got to change my wording into a positive affirmation rather than a negative, here's what's going on. But just by turning it around, all of a sudden you change the conversation a bit. And when we do that, it works. But you're right, we don't do that regularly. We don't do that all the time. We do it just so rarely.
What was funny is as you were queuing up what you and Louise do, the first thought I had was, oh, no, because if you try to tell somebody, that they're using the wrong words while they're in the midst of using the wrong words, that's when you're only going to meet resistance. But when you just said turn it around, I thought, oh, that would work with me. I would not feel the need to resist that phrase.
Right. It's just a reminder. It's not a put down in any way. It's just
it's not a criticism.
Yeah.
That is nice. I like that. I'm going to use that for myself. I'm going to use that literally on myself.
Yeah, turn it around is a good phrase.
Yeah, come on, Wendy, turn that around. Turn that one around.
And especially you, because you're so good at turning it around. I mean,
Thank you for the compliment.
Well, it's true. How often in conversations, both on the show and off the show, have you come up with a turn around way of saying something that can be uncomfortable? And you're really good at it. So you have every reason to apply it as often as possible. But I just like the fact that you... That was something
many years ago when I was learning NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. I was in the course learning this, and we were in a section called reframing. And that was a concept that did not seem to come very natural to me. And then, we kept talking about it, learning it. Then they put it into a game format. And it was the game that turned me around. Because we're all sitting, like eager little beavers, and the teacher's up in the front of the room, and the teacher would, say a phrase or a sentence. And like popcorn, each one of us would just pop another answer, even if we stepped all over each other, throwing out as many different meanings as we could possibly find for that sentence or phrase that she had just said.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, because I used to be very competitive, and so I wanted to throw in as many different ways to do this, too. I wanted to I think there was probably a prize, for whoever had the most turnaround reframing answers. But it loosened me up because what I used to think was I only would want to reframe something or find a different point of view if it fit with my belief system, if I thought it was actually plausible, did it seem appropriate for the situation? But doing this game, or in the format where it was a game, none of those rules applied. because it was just turn it around in any which way you could, find a different viewpoint, and you got a point for it.
Yep.
And when the game was over, I do remember internalizing, I want to master this, because I didn't know law of attraction then, but I just had an intuitive sense that being a master reframer would probably be really beneficial for myself and others.
Boy, that was a good insight. That was very prescient, I would say. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was big.
Yeah.
I have found it to be ironic in my life that usually the things that have naturally come the most difficult are the ones that, because I can't figure out why I can't just get it right away, I just hunker down and determine I am going to become the best at this, because I'll be darned if I'm going to let anything be not easy for me.
Yeah.
Even if it has to be hard while I make it easy, it's like, I'm going to figure this out. And I just get really doggedly determined. And, I told you that's kind of how becoming a master storyteller and being able to flip the story around to benefit people. I was listening to Abraham, and they were reframing stories left, right, and all over. And I'm like, God, I can't seem to do this. It seems so hard.
After all that.
And I just set the intention. I'm like, I don't know how, and I don't even know the skills to do this, but I am going to master storytelling in a way that I can turn anybody's story upside down to make it positive.
Well, I laughed, but I really shouldn't, because when I first got exposed to the whole concept of the law of attraction, I became aware of my thoughts pretty quickly, of, what kind of a negative pattern or negative patterns I was in. And sure enough, there were a ton of them. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized that roughly 98% of what came out of my mouth was negative in some way, especially negative to what I wanted, which is a frightening and daunting prospect, because I knew I had to start putting out the messages of, the positive of what I wanted, and I needed to learn to avoid doing the negative. And I'm thinking to myself, how on earth am I going to turn all of that around? There is so much of it. It was overwhelming.
What did you do?
For the longest time, I treaded water, to be perfectly honest. But then one day I got the clarification that, well, you don't really have to worry about trying to keep up with every thought, because that would drive anyone crazy. And instead, all you really have to do is monitor your emotions, the emotional set point system. And once I got that was an easier way to get there, then I said, oh, thank goodness. Because I didn't know how I was going to solve that one. That just seemed too much.
So you were paying attention to how you felt.
Yes.
And then if it didn't feel good to you, then did you pay attention to your thoughts to see what thoughts were going on at the time? I
would love to say it was that simple. But I was also dealing with the fact that as a well-trained male, most of my emotions weren't necessarily available to me. So I had to simultaneously start paying attention to find out, well, what am I feeling? And most often coming up with the answer, I don't feel anything at all. And then trying to say, well, okay, if I'm not feeling anything at all, that really means it's there. I'm just not noticing it. So where is it? And going to find it and digging up the issues and so forth. So, I mean, the long story short is that it took a while. It took a while to get into that mode. And I think the best way I did it was just by some of the things my wife suggested, which was when I take my walks, just do the nature appreciation stuff. And, look at the detail of it and just get in the habit of feeling good. And sure enough, over time, as I did that, the other emotions started to come out more, and I started to be able to notice them, and I got better and better at identifying what my emotional set point was. But it took a while. It didn't get there quickly. It took a while.
But it sounded like when you started to notice you weren't feeling positive or happy, you were asking yourself a series of questions in order to kind of move you toward where you wanted to go.
Oh yeah, I did not know how to move my own emotional set point. That added to the frustration.
I think it's funny because you may not have been consciously aware of how to move you to a better place, but I saw two things that just popped for me right away. One, you were a well-trained male in a positive aspect. Like, I know you've used well-trained male in a negative way, but you were a well-trained man in that the moment you didn't feel good and you got awareness of it, you took yourself through a practice of asking one question after another until it felt better for you. Until you felt better.
That's not the way I perceived it at the time. The way I perceived it at the time was just that I was thrashing around trying to find an answer. But you're right. That's exactly what I did.
but this, I just fed back to you what you just told me. Now, you had your own internal perception of how it felt and how you've, perceived how it went down.
Right.
But I want to feed back to you, Walt. You are a well-trained male.
Well, thank you.
But it's a good thing because you have taken the training of the ingrained training that men had. You have actually turned it around and changed it into a positive practice for you personally.
Well, it's nice to know that I took something that worked so much against me and turned it into something that actually works in my favor. That's a nice transition. That's a really nice transition.
So now I'd be really curious, the next time you, just from a habitual perspective, you go to use the phrase, well, I had that male training in a negative way. I wonder if the next time that pops up, you go, oh, no, that doesn't fit me anymore. That's not me. Why do I want to hold myself to that negative pattern? That isn't who I've become. It's obsolete. I grew past it. I grew through it. I grew in spite of it. I grew because of it.
It raises an interesting question, though, because the overall topic is, what do our words matter? Does it matter what words we use? And what you just described is a perfectly valid way of recognizing the importance of reframing and rewording and changing the meaning behind our wording and our experiences. But there's also a tricky part here. The tricky part is, like for us doing a podcast, there are times in order to provide the contrast, in order to make it clear where we came from, you have to describe a negative situation. How do you do that without tripping yourself up and getting stuck there? I think that's really the issue. I mean, I certainly don't want to get stuck there, and I certainly don't want to reprogram myself back into that. But I got to find some way to identify it. Otherwise, the story doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean?
Well, I do know what you mean, because I definitely went through a period of years where that question was on the plate for me, because I'm a natural teacher and I have coaching clients. And so part of what was necessary in the process to teach or to coach was to explain what was in light of what is, a negative to a positive. Mm-hmm. So what I've come to recognize for myself is that when I tell the past side of the story, where the negative contrast used to be, I do my best to use certain inflections that don't take me into the dark dreariness of it, because all of us can do this, but I don't want to reactivate the negative aspect of it.
Right.
And so I want to stay in the negative part for as little time as possible, just enough to get the point of the story across.
Exactly.
And to get people to empathize and go, oh, I can relate to that.
Yep.
But I don't want to have it come across in such a dreary way that people go, oh, my God, now I'm depressed too. And then I want to get to the good side as quickly as possible. And so I notice you notice this about me, and others have said this, that you can tell where I am in a story emotionally based on the inflection of my voice.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And, to me, if I can laugh about something, I know I'm on the other side of it and I didn't activate anything ugly. But I also notice when I'm telling the negative side of the story, I stayed neutral and I know this is how I know the past is no longer my present, because I can tell the negative past without it activating anything, because I feel really neutral about it. And so to me, what I found is when I was using some stories to try to help coach other people, if it pulled me down, that told me I wasn't ready to be telling that story yet. Because it was still too fresh and I could go into the activation of the negativity of way too quickly. But when I can tell a story, even really, really dark, dismal, bad news, and I don't feel any of that, then I know I'm in a good place to tell that story for the purpose of teaching.
Yeah, I see your point, yeah. The other thing, too, is that when I tell stories that have a negative setup to them, I try very quickly to get to some way to laugh at it. I mean, you hear me during the podcast. I always find little twists and turns on words and so forth, and I'm sure that's basically a defense mechanism I use to keep myself from reliving whatever that thing is I'm talking about. If I can laugh at it, then I'm not paying attention to the misery of it. And so I laugh a lot. I've learned how to laugh a lot. And I'm glad that I laugh a lot, and I intend to continue to laugh a lot because it's a great defense mechanism. But that seems to be my primary tool right now.
Well, and I'll do this just for illustration purposes, but it was back in 2009 when I went on the Abraham Alaskan cruise that I was so excited about going on this cruise. I'd been planning it for a year. It took a year to save the money for my husband and I to go. I'd always wanted to go on an Alaskan cruise because even though I live in Texas, I love the cold. Love, love, love the cold. And so this was something I was really looking forward to. And so there we are on the first day. We're in the cruise ship. We haven't even set sail yet. You know, we're still docked because people are still on boarding. And I was unpacking our luggage. Meanwhile, my husband was out on our balcony, and he was looking at the beautiful water, you know, and he was going, Wendy, come and look at this. And he would talk about some wonderful bird he saw or some fish that jumped up out of the water, frolicking about. And he was just in pure delight, enjoying, you know, all the vistas of what he was seeing and what was to come. And he wanted to pull me into that.
Sure.
But I felt compelled to unpack. That's what you do. You get someplace, you unpack your luggage, and then you start the fun.
A comes before B. I got it.
Exactly. Well, and that's my structural thing. So I was doing my thing, but I was starting to get really annoyed every time he wanted me to come out there. I wasn't annoyed he wanted me to join him. That was delightful. What annoyed me was I felt I had to do this thing. I had to unpack before I could get to the enjoyment. And I remember as I was holding a pair of his underwear in hand, and I don't know why that feels ironic or silly just to say, I'm holding a stack of underwear as I'm about to put it into a drawer, and I get mad. I mean really, really mad, because I realized he is out there totally enjoying the trip that I planned, that I saved the money for, that I did all the planning, all the logistics, everything for us to get here, and my husband is out there enjoying my trip.
How dare he?
Exactly. And so in that moment, I just have an internal dialogue, me and the universe, and I went, how the hell did this happen? What did I do to create this? And like a flash, all of a sudden I heard, you've become Barbara Wife.
Oh, dear.
Barbara is the name of my mother.
Oh, okay.
And in that flash of Barbara Wife, and I'd never heard that phrase before, but that's just how I interpreted what Spirit was saying. I recognized I had become a carbon copy of my mother and all of her enabling behaviors. And she did everything for my father. He did nothing. He couldn't even boil water. If she wasn't alive, he would have starved to death because he wouldn't have been able to eat.
Oh, God.
And I recognized, oh, my God, I became her. How the hell did this happen? And that was a startling moment, but the greatest epiphany probably of my entire life. And needless to say, I knew in that moment my life had changed. And I finished our packing, I got out on the balcony, I relaxed, and I just enjoyed the water, the ocean, what was before us. However, I also said to him, we need to have a serious conversation, because I told him what my epiphany was, and I said, I'm about to change. I don't know how I'm going to change. I don't know exactly how the change is going to occur, but I'm going to change because I just recognized what I consider the greatest fear of my life, which was to become my mother. And I adore my mother, but I did not like the behaviors that she had, especially in how she related to my dad, because I didn't like the dynamics of her marriage relationship. I didn't want that marriage relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I even said to my husband, I said, I don't know if our marriage will survive the change I'm about to undergo. And that didn't make sense to him at the time. And I just had an inkling of what that meant. Because when we had married 9 years before, we married under the dynamics of me being a certain way and him being a certain way. And I was very dominant and controlling and enabling, and I did things for him. And even if he was completely capable, I, in my own mind, decided I could do it better, faster, quicker, and more efficiently, and so he should let me do it.
Oh, dear.
Well, that's what my mother did.
Talk about a setup. Oof. You set yourself up real good.
And even though he was totally capable of doing things, maybe not in the same way as me, but he was capable of getting them done, I robbed him of doing those things. So over the years, he just stopped doing them because why bother? Because I always swooped in and said, oh, I'll do it for you. And then I became, there I was on this Alaskan cruise, and I became resentful because I did everything, at least in my mind. I did everything. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. And it wasn't even right. It wasn't even a good, equitable relationship for either of us. He didn't want me to do everything either. He just couldn't do it because I just swooped in and did it. And I stole it from him. And I knew that this awareness was going to change everything in how we related to one another. And that's why I said I don't know if our marriage will be able to withstand this change. And fast forward it 3 years later, I had come to the end of, I had started making lots of internal changes, and I was no longer the enabler. I was no longer a Barbara wife. And I don't know if my husband really ingested the shifts that were taking place, because now I was no longer tolerant of him not doing certain things. But in a way, it was so unfair of me, at least this is how I see it, because he was totally capable of it 9, 10, 11, 12 years before when I married him, but now I helped to make him be incapable. Although there was a point I don't know that he really took the initiative. He never fought me on the things I said I would take over. He was like, okay.
Well, I can't say I blame him, really.
I mean, there was a definite co-creation in what we did.
Yeah.
But, it came to a point where I recognized the dynamic that we now had was not the dynamic that I wanted to continue in to have a marriage, which is why I'm the one who asked for divorce. And even though he was kind of shocked because he thought we would just keep going with things limping along, I said, you know what, we're too young and too vital for us to both be strapped to something that is not absolutely incredibly fabulous. And so happily we uncoupled. As in, like, we're very good friends. We adore each other. We don't talk much anymore because we're not married. We don't have need to. But we can reach out when we want to. And I just want to throw that in as, divorce is not always a four-lettered word. This was a good thing for both of us. But so I told that whole story, and I don't have really pain in it. There was one point I started to go into the pain, like when I started to talk about I was really angry. There was a moment I started to go into it because I'm really good at emoting what I want to. Mm-hmm. But the moment I went there, I went, oh, no, you don't want to activate that. That doesn't feel good. And so I jumped back out.
Which is good. That's really good.
So how much you could tell while I was talking would be up to you to be able to give me feedback. But I know that while I told the story, I knew that the purpose of telling that particular story was because I wanted people to see how you can tell a negative thing with a positive. But to me, it's such a good thing that I went through that metamorphosis.
Oh, yeah.
It was one of the most, pivotal points of my entire life. It changed all of me, and I'm so grateful for it. Even grateful for hearing the words Barbara wife, which now just make me giggle every time I think about it.
That was an interesting insight to get, no doubt. As you were telling that story, too, I mean, I'm not sure that I would want to try to say that I get a good sense of, where you're coming from and what you're feeling at any given time, because that just seems too presumptuous to me to even attempt that. But what I did think as you were telling that is, and this is the kind of thing that's really easy to think about and see when you're hearing somebody else tell their story, I don't remember what book it is, but one of the Abraham books, there is a section that talks about how every negative thing that happens in our lives happens within ourselves, and we do it to ourselves. And that's not the way it's said, that's not the way it's written, but the meaning of it is everything that we go through that is in some way not our preference, we internalize it, we turn it into a thing. We may cast out and blame somebody else for it, or we may blame a circumstance for it, or we may blame an upbringing for it, or whatever. But ultimately, we're the ones who put it in there, and
Absolutely.
we're the ones who can take it out. We're the ones who can do what we want to do with it. It's completely up to us. And so I'm thinking about that, and I'm hearing you tell the story about how you were in that place, and you decided, I'm going to start making some changes, and you started to make the changes, and you were telling it partly in the context of your marriage, but what I was hearing was you were making the changes, and the changes were big changes, and you were deciding, I didn't want to live in that space anymore. I didn't want to make myself feel that way. I didn't want to live that pain anymore, and I was done with it, so I was moving on. That was the story that I heard. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what Abraham was talking about.
Well, and it wasn't just, I told it in the context of my marriage, but no longer being an enabler changed my relationship with my coworkers, my friends, my family members, and my husband.
Oh, yeah.
And the one it changed the most, other than my husband, and that one on the surface seems the most because now there was a divorce, the biggest change was with my mother. And that's where those behaviors, where I modeled those behaviors. But I had been enabling my mother for years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was ironic that I learned that behavior from her, but I learned how to use it with her.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I felt the pain of, I don't want to enable my husband anymore because that hurts me, I recognized how my enabling my mother hurt both of us. And it might seem like an odd time to make this shift, but after my father passed away about 4 years ago, that's when everybody in my family expected me to be the biggest enabler. Because now someone needs to take care of Mom, because before it was Dad, now it needs to be me. And I did for a while until it started driving me crazy, and I started resenting her. And I realized it was not because I resented her, but because I wanted out of this pattern.
Yes.
Of I'm the oldest daughter and it's my job to take care of her. And I realized I was doing it while robbing her of the opportunity to become self-sufficient, which is what she was literally saying with her words. Now that your dad's gone, I want to learn how to do things for myself.
Wow,
I want to be self-sufficient.
She was
I've
really
never
saying
done these
that.
things before, but I want to know how.
Oh, my goodness. Good for her. Yeah.
And so there was a strange little power struggle between us because she'd be saying with her words, I want to learn how to do it for myself. And then she'd say, Wendy, do it for me. And I'm like, okay, Mom, I'll do it for you. And then she'd resent me because I'm doing it for her. And then I'd say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do it. She said, well, I can't. I don't know how to do it. So it was a big struggle in her learning how to stand on her own and me learning how to let go and watch her fall, knowing she's going to find a way to get herself up again.
It's also
but I'll tell you.
That's where you wish you also had the opportunity to say to her, turn it around.
Exactly.
In a way that she would understand it, right?
Exactly. But I even noticed today I was training a coworker on something, and the very skills that I've learned in the process of no longer being the enabler, but being a teacher and allowing someone to make a mistake and then encouraging them to find a way to resolve it. I've watched myself do that over and over as I'm training this coworker on this one process, and it's fascinating.
It is.
It's fascinating, and I love even, we're talking about words, and it's like, do they really matter? They do, because there are certain words I use when I'm encouraging her that I can tell just light her up, and it gives her just that little boost to feel the confidence that she needs to feel so she can be self-sufficient.
I would say it actually goes beyond words. I think it goes to attitude, because what your attitude is saying is, I believe you can do this. I'm confident you can do this. I am looking forward to seeing you do this.
And those are the words that I'm using, and I put my attitude of I truly believe this is what can happen behind it. So I'm not just saying, oh no, I know you can do it, or you'll figure it out.
Right.
I'm not being nonchalant about it. I'm really putting my heart into saying, I know you've got this. I've watched you do this and this and this. You have all the skills that it takes. And your brain is like firing on all cylinders, and you're asking great questions, and those questions would never have even dawned on you if you weren't making connections. So that tells me you're learning. And she's like, oh, thank you, Wendy. And it's like, so I'm very specific in how I word things, and simultaneously I do my best. Not always, but do I accomplish it? But I do my best to put my heart behind what I'm saying so that I'm fully congruent.
And your best is pretty darn good.
Well, thank you.
Well, it is. You've worked very hard to get to that point. So, and it's evident. It's evident in the way you express yourself. So, yeah. And
I would say I have worked really hard at it, but it wasn't hard in the sense of, oh, my God, this is so laborious. It was more a matter of staying diligent in my attention to paying attention and not just letting things just happen nilly-willy or by default. Because one of the things I recognize, and communication, you can probably tell, is really important to me.
No, really?
When we communicate with one another, we have the ability to influence one another into greater pain or greater pleasure. And I want to know and believe that at the end of my life, as I'm looking from the other side, I can see evidence that I made multiple influences toward helping people have greater pleasure in their life versus greater pain.
That certainly gives you a lot of pleasure, and that's what makes it worthwhile.
That it does give me a lot of pleasure, because when I hear somebody light up, even if I can't see them, but I can hear it in their tone of their voice, it makes me light up.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I like to do the podcast. The only bad part about doing the podcast is I can't see the listener's reaction. And I really wish I could see the listener's reaction. But except for that, I can imagine it. I can imagine it, and if people give feedback, then I can tell from the feedback. But most of the time, I'm just imagining what it's like to hear it. And most of the time, what we're putting out, I like. It feels good. And so I know it's going to feel good on the other side. So it may not be vicarious, but it's certainly a strong motivator for me, knowing that what we're doing here feels good for other people. And,
in conjunction with that, since we're not in a visual medium right now, we're not on TV, we're not doing a Zoom platform where we can see the visual online, one of the ways that we can get good feedback is I know that people can add comments, right?
Yep.
To your loatoday.net.
Right.
Isn't that where they can add comments?
Absolutely.
So, if you're listening to the show, whether live or, later, we'd love for you to add your comments, because we'd like to know, are we making a difference? Did it put a smile on your face? Or I was even thinking about this yesterday. If you have a question that's like, you really would love somebody to talk about some topic, or you have a burning desire to know something, or you have a specific question, please put it in the comments, and then we'll talk about it the next day or the day after. But that would be a great way of letting us know that what we're doing is making a difference for you, as well as you get the opportunity to engage with us, because, now we're in 2017, and this is the digital era, and this is how we engage these days.
I'll even make it easier. Send me an email directly. My email address is simple, walt@loatoday.net. That's a quick way. Send it to me. That way I'll be able to see it quickly, and we'll get it on to the next show.
Oh, that's perfect. Thanks for adding that, Walt. I hadn't thought about that.
There you go. Nice and simple. We got about 30 seconds, and part of that's the theme music, so we got to be quick. But, Wendy, it's been a pleasure as usual. I can't wait to do it again tomorrow.
This has been fun. I've enjoyed it. I can't wait to either.
We'll see you all tomorrow here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye now.